This is the Skin Science Podcast. I'm Dr. Thomas Hitchcock, and here we'll investigate everything skin science and dissect it from a scientific perspective, analyze it from a medical perspective, critique it from a consumer perspective, and give insight from an industry perspective.
Oscar Wilde once said, "One should never trust a woman who tells one her real age. A woman who would tell one that would tell one anything." However, the problem isn't always purposely disclosing one's age, but that your age can sometimes be written all over your face. What if someone was to tell you that your skin is what gives you away? Our skin is exposed to stress from the environment like UV and pollution, but also from inside our bodies via our metabolism. So today, we're going to focus on skin and longevity, what causes skin aging, and a little insight into what you can do about it. But first things first, with me here in the studio, we have the world's loveliest spin doctor, as opposed to skin doctor, Angela McDonald. Hello, Angela.
Hello.
And we're back again.
Thrilled to be here.
All right.
Once again.
And once again, we welcome to the podcast Dr. Doris Day, who is now an official friend of the podcast, no longer really a guest per se, but she's a board-certified dermatologist specializing in laser, cosmetic, surgical, and aesthetic dermatology, a medical educator, and a highly sought-after media personality, a clinical associate professor of dermatology at the NYU Langone Medical Center, and owner of a premier medical and aesthetic dermatology clinic in the Upper East Side of New York City. Welcome back, Doris.
Great to be back with you. Happy to be a friend of the podcast. What an honor.
That just means now we're going to call on you pretty much every time and see if you're available.
Awesome.
So today we're very excited about this one and this podcast in particular because we're going to be talking about something that's kind of a buzz thing lately, which is skin age and longevity. There's a huge kind of movement around longevity, meaning how can we live longer, better? And age being, we have a lot of testing and stuff going on genetically to see what our biological age is versus our chronological age, which are two distinct things. And so today we're going to address a lot of those, that buzz that's going on around longevity and age and bring it to skin. How does it affect skin? How is skin age affected and longevity affected? So the first question I want to pose is to the women of this podcast. What is the most concerning thing about skin aging in a women's perspective? Doris, why don't you take that first?
Well, I find that it can start really young, and now we're living a lot longer, but I see women worrying about looking older at a much younger age. So women are coming in their early 20s wanting to do preventative in-office treatments like neuromodulators, which would be like Botox or Dysport, in order to prevent the aging process. And I think a lot of what they get is misguided in that, yes, we want to be proactive about how we age and do the right things. But now there's a sense that you can go out and get lots of sun and drink and stay up late and stress and do all these things. And then you can get a treatment or a pill that's going to undo the damage. And while we're getting closer to that, we're not really there yet. And the idea is that I can give them much better guidance about what they can do to age beautifully and age well. And so I came up with one of my best lines for my 20-year-old patients. And I tell them, nothing looks more beautiful in your 50s than sun protection in your 20s. So it's a lot of times it's guidance and helping redirect what they're trying to do and not give them only shortcuts.
Right. So what's the old saying? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
It's more like a ton of cure.
A ton of cure. and so it's true, at some point, we look at science fiction, how they can basically fix anything. If you break an arm, they just put it in a machine and it's automatically mended. Who knows in the future what we'll be able to do. But for now, we're not able to do that. And so it's much easier to prevent than to cure most of the times. So Angela, from your perspective, what is kind of your thoughts on women?
Kind of just feed on what Doris just said. If you look at the American Medical Spa Association statistics, what she mentioned there, the 20 to 34-year-old patient is the fastest growing sector. Those are the ones who are coming in and seeking information more readily than the 34 to 50 year old, even though the 34 to 50 to 55 year old still makes up half of the market, of the target market for medical spas. So from my perspective, what I see is women having children later and wanting to stay relevant with younger mothers that they're side by side raising kids with. I see women in the career wanting to pursue their career longer and wanting to stay relevant in whatever field they're in as well. So they're seeking the skin rejuvenation and the skin health. They're seeking health, physical health, along with that, in order to be able to raise kids at a later age, to work longer, to have a career longer, and stay relevant with whatever age group that they're working side by side with.
So is what I'm hearing that from a woman's perspective, the adage of growing old gracefully is not really in vogue now? Or am I mishearing?
Well, growing old gracefully can mean a lot of things. For some people, it means do nothing and go out there and just basically poison your skin by getting lots of sun and just don't do anything about it. That's not really growing old gracefully. I feel that growing old gracefully is is doing things like proper sun protection, having a healthy diet, making sure that you take advantage of your genetics. If you're blessed and you won the genetic lottery and you have good genes, to do everything in your power to get the most out of your good genes. And if you don't have good genes, do everything in your power to make the most out of them so they behave as much like good genes as possible. And that's really what we're learning. My worry is that the sense that there's a quick fix for things, and especially with the younger population where they think, well, it's not permanent, it'll go away, but they miss out on the opportunity of knowing what they would naturally age like and what they would normally look like if they didn't do these interventions. And so I think we have to be very careful that just because we have things that we could do doesn't mean that we should do them. And the idea is to truly age gracefully, which means doing the things in lifestyle that are helpful and in office to balance out what we see structurally that happens, but understanding that there are structural changes that happen with age. It's different in women than it is in men, but we understand for both that there are specific structural changes so that there's no way that a 50-year-old can look 20. A 50-year-old or a 60-year-old can look rejuvenated, but they won't look like a 20-year-old. And that's a good thing. I think there is something to the beauty of every decade. And my goal is to celebrate that, not to try to undo it or to try to make somebody appear like they're 20 or 30 years younger.
Right. And so I guess it's an age appropriate type of, mentality of looking the best you possibly can for your age.
Thomas, when you say age appropriate, you just made me think about something.
Okay.
When we talk age appropriate, thinking about what age is. And I think age is more than one thing. We have a chronologic age, which is that number that you should never tell, apparently, so I'll stop. And then there's the actual biologic number, which is the epigenetic number, right? It's what you do to help optimize your chronologic number. And so biologically, we can be decades younger than our chronologic number. And so you're telling your true age. I mean, I do a lot of testing on myself, and my biologic age, I'm happy to say, is decades younger than my chronologic age. And the older I get, the happier I am about that.
Right. And that's kind of what I was driving at. Yeah, that's what I was driving at a little bit, which is, we can be happy with where we are, chronologically, and just be the best that we can be there. But with the science that we're now we're understanding now, it may in the not too distant future be a big possibility to be decades younger biologically than chronologically. And we all know people that just look, quite young for their age, their skin quality is better for their age, and vice versa, right? And as you mentioned, epigenetics plays a large role, as we're going to see now, is that we can't control our genetics, but we can control our epigenetics in some capacity, not on all capacities. And so that's really what I'm driving at, is because it's similar to kind of the movement of obesity versus, embracing your body type. Where's that line of where you're adopting an unhealthy lifestyle versus just knowing where your genetics can take you. But at a certain point, if we understand enough about genetics and epigenetics, and then clinically we can implement those things, then we have to ask ourselves, should we really settle for things that are unhealthy? And if you could argue that when our skin gets to a place where it is aged looking, there are things that are happening that are not healthy inside the skin, which we're going to talk about in a second. But before we get to that, I wanted to get a little bit of a man's perspective. I, being a man, will give my own perspective, but we also have in the studio Dr. Brian Jones, who is an employee at Crown. He's the director of medical and clinical affairs, and he's going to be off to the side here, and I'm going to ask for his opinion on this in a second. It doesn't have to be long, but he's going to be here just to provide some extra commentary. But as a man, traditionally, men have not been super obsessed with aging well. Character lines and all that stuff, men a lot of times feel that the more kind of lines you have on your face, the more character you have. However, that has changed in the not so recent past, where a lot of men are now getting just as many aesthetic procedures, if not more, than women counterparts. Now, I wouldn't say as many men are doing that. I think that's pretty obvious, but there are a lot of men that are definitely taking care of themselves a lot more. I think they accept, like as a man myself, I accept my aging, I think a little more than like my sister does. But
you're still 12, Thomas. What's to accept, honestly?
But like I have a big line here. So it's one of those things where, but there are things that I do that I definitely take care of my skin, and of course I do research in regenerative medicine and such. So I have a little bit of an edge over most men probably do about what I have access to. But I don't think overall men are as concerned, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be. And one of the reasons is what we'll talk about later, which is about the skin being a manifestation of your overall age and health, biological age and health, and how we should be very much looking at that as a signal, and how it is actually one of the best signals as you're up to your biological age. So Brian, what's your thoughts really quick before we move on?
Well, I guess I won't say what my age is, but AARP has me on their frequent mailing list. But again, I think everybody's right, is that for men, it's more of distinguished as you age. But again, you think back as towards when you're in your younger teens and the sun exposure that you had at that age, and wondering whether or not it's going to come back and show up as skin cancer or some type of condition on your skin. So again, there is some concern, but again, it's nothing that compared to what women feel and they're concerned about skin.
And I would say, Thomas, that, I agree with what Doris said.
You're not a man.
About, thank goodness. It's about growing old gracefully, I think now, but with intention, because there is so much that we can do to turn back the hands of time a bit in terms of how we look, in terms of how we feel. Mm-hmm. And I think, one of the interesting things, I think we all listened to a podcast recently that talked about how it's all connected. What's going on the outside is also reflected on the inside. And I think that's what we're looking for as women these days.
That's just what I said. Just a few minutes ago.
I think that's what's good is that, we, can be very intentional about growing old gracefully and not just allow it to happen, but actually do things to affect overall skin and health.
Right. And that's it comes all the way down to aging in general, but skin is, again, a manifestation of us completely. But aging in general, we all want to live the whole of our lives as healthy and happy as possible, right? So nobody's going to say to you, I want to, gradually get worse off and be in more pain until I die. No, everybody's like, we accept our mortality, but we would like until the day we die to be in perfect health, to be cognitively there 100%. And then, we go to sleep and then, that's it. I think most people.
My dad had the best line for this. He said he wanted to die young at an old age.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the goal,
line.
right?
I know, he always said that.
That's the goal, though. That's the goal, is that, we want the best quality of life. And that's why in the skin industry, in the dermatology industry, when you first get into it, you have to kind of ask yourselves, especially as a scientist, I'd ask myself, what am I going to do? What mark am I leaving on the world? What am I doing here? What's my purpose? And a lot of it comes down to the skin. When we actually make the skin better for people, it improves their quality of life. Things like acne, aging, all these things improve quality of life when we can solve them. It allows people to go through, their life with confidence, and also, as we talked about, a lot of times what we see on the outside reflects what's on the inside. But the caveat there is there are some aesthetic procedures that can mask age, right? and we'll get into that in a second. But before we get into that, I did want to talk to what causes skin to age. And so let's really briefly talk about what causes skin to age from a perspective of like your patients, Doris. What do they think causes skin to age? What is their mindset of what I should or shouldn't do to keep my skin young?
Well, everybody comes in and they say, well, I wish I could go back and do less sun exposure. So we know that probably 80 to 90% of skin aging from the external factors is from UV radiation. And we know down to the matrix metalloproteinases, the thymine dimers, genetics that already have you starting off with a few hits depending on your skin type and your family history of skin cancers and aging, that some people are prone to these things at a younger age than others. And so all of those things, patients will come in and say, oh, it's gravity. My gravity is always there. Gravity doesn't just happen when you hit a certain age, but at a certain age, when you lose the collagen support, you lose hormones that are building collagen, you lose the ability to repair and naturally rejuvenate. Your skin does this every day, but as you get older and as you naturally lose estrogen, if you don't replenish it, and as you break down collagen and you're not replenishing it, then you'll see the effects of gravity. And you'll see it in some areas more than others. And what we've learned is that you have bone, which is the skeleton, that's your foundation. You have ligaments, you have fat, you have subcutaneous tissue, and you have the layers of the skin. And they age at different rates. And so even with fat, you have superficial fat and you have deep fat in the skin that age at different rates. And I've even been seeing that the mid face ages at a different rate than the lower face. The lower face and around the mouth ages more like the neck. And so you really have to protect those areas and treat those areas differently. So when people get fillers or do treatments, the areas that we treat in the mid face and the cheeks can last for years, but the lower face may be gone in as little as 6 months. And because the lower face is so functional, we have to be careful what we use in those areas to not make the face stiff, so that when you try to talk or smile or move, you can still naturally animate. So there's a lot that goes into aesthetics of rejuvenation, and that understanding of the functional aging is really in its infancy, because before 20 years ago, it was really about age, fall behind, do a facelift. And facelifts were about structural redraping.
Right.
Now, because we're not talking about surgical interventions, we're talking about non-surgical interventions, we're learning that there's a lot more that goes on. And so I talk about injection anatomy as opposed to surgical anatomy. And they're two very different things, even in the same face.
Right. And, I think that's also on the subject of getting interventions for signs of aging. Is where we kind of need to also have the discussion of, okay, well, what is masking aging and what is actually addressing aging? So if, for instance, getting a filler for, for aesthetic purposes, like if you want bigger cheekbones, is different than getting it because of volume loss due to aging, atrophy because of aging. But one thing about that a lot of people don't also realize is that, we hear a lot of things about collagen in marketing. And people understand, I think, that there's a lot of collagen in skin, which there is. What they don't understand is that there's multiple types of collagen that are all very different in the way that they are used by our body, that the connective tissue that actually holds our skin in place is actually also collagen. And so there's a lot more than just the collagen of the skin that is leading to aging and sagging as we age and such. Also the connective tissue under the skin that holds it in place, these little anchors. We have little anchors that actually hold certain parts of our skin in place. We have, septae within the fatty tissue even, that actually a lot of it's a lattice that actually holds some of the tissue in place and the fat in place. And so a lot of this is actually forms of aging as well, or symptoms of aging as well. And in reality, when we talk about truly anti-aging techniques, it shouldn't just mask by, like you talked about, redraping or filling, but we should also address the holistic molecular and genetic causes of aging, which is what I would like to do now.
But there's one more aspect of it when you talk about masking.
Yes.
It's sometimes my most fit patients that need the most volume because they have low body fat.
Sure.
And so they can look more gaunt. So it's not always masking aging in terms of damage done externally. Sometimes it's a sign of somebody who is super, super healthy that can have lower body fat and they become more skeletonized. And I came up with the line, I don't want you to just be better. I don't want you to just look better. I want you to be better.
Sure.
Because what I see is that a lot of times people come in and they just want things to mask what they see as signs of aging, but it's an opportunity to help them understand supplements and lifestyle changes they can make. Because in the end, there's really no shortcuts. Getting rid of all your lines and wrinkles doesn't really make you look younger. It's having balance that is important. And when you're healthier internally, it shows in your skin dramatically. And the beauty of this is that it can show in as quickly as a week. Just make one small lifestyle change of eating less sugar or trying intermittent fasting or time restricted eating. You'll see the difference in your skin and in your eyes in just a few days. So the power of making an improvement is going on in your body, but the first place you'll see it is in your skin.
Right. And so one kind of tidbit of information regarding what you just said is that when you look at the different tissues of the body, and we talked about this on our last podcast where we talked about skin remodeling. And so when you look in the tissues of the body, we talked about the microbiome as well as the human cells of the skin. There are actually ways where you can take the genetics of tissues of the body and look at the methylation patterns and such, and you can actually accurately tell a person's chronological versus their biological age. Now, the interesting thing is that the skin is the most accurate of the tissues as far as correlating in the age, but that's the same as not just with genetics of the individual, but also the microbiome. So you can tell by the composition of the microbiome how old or how young somebody is by a kind of a resolution of 4 years. And if you look at the different microbiomes of the body, you can tell that as well, but not as accurately as you can through the skin microbiome. And we'll get into that towards the end of the podcast, a little bit about how that feeds into it. Because one thing that people tend to not realize is that it's all connected. When it comes to aging, it's all connected. Inflammation is connected to, your health, meaning you said they're more healthy because they're thinner, but sometimes being too thin is actually unhealthy. We all know that. So the right, and it's what a hormetic kind of thing where too little is not good, too much is not good. We have this happy medium, and that's in general in our bodies. For instance, oxygen. Oxygen too little, hypoxia, you die. Or it's also inflammatory to be hypoxic. Too much oxygen, you also die. Too little water, you die. Too much water, you die. The thing is, most things in general have that phenomena of the right amount is the best amount, and it's about understanding what that right amount is. I mean, it seems obvious, but then there's people that go out and they're drinking like these huge barrels of water every day thinking that's more healthy, when what they're doing is they're flushing all their electrolytes out. And so, you ask them, where did you hear that? And they're like, well, I was told to drink 8 glasses of water a day, so therefore more should be better. This more equals better phenomena, I just don't understand where people are getting that from, but they have it. Same with exercise, same with everything. That being said, let's move on to the genetic composition of what we know about the aging process, because this all will tie in towards the end all together as far as what we can actually do about it. Because we talked about masking aging, but, that's one thing if you can't do anything about it. But if you can do something about it, then shouldn't we propose that should be your first kind of, attack, is to actually try to prevent aging versus, we talked about it, prevention is better than a cure. So what is prevention, and how would we go about even deciding what that is? So to understand that, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm listening. I thought you were asking the question, but I want to hear it. To understand that, I'm interested.
So to understand that, as a geneticist, I want to go deep and find out the molecular changes that occur, molecular and cellular changes that occur during the aging process. Now, there's still some mystery, a little bit of mystery around, what kind of instigates this cascade. But we do know that it's interconnected in the sense that certain genes do have changes as whether they're upregulated or downregulated. And so different genes are very important in the aging process. And what causes those changings? There's a lot of epigenetic stuff. There's a lot of environmental stuff. But then there's also some stuff that just happens to everybody, and we're still trying to figure out why. And some of the way that we can figure out why is by looking at animal models. There are some animals that last longer than other animals, and seeing kind of where there's differences and similarities in the human genetics. So one of the molecules that is the most interesting to me is NF-kappa B. And we're not going to get into too much of that because, we don't want to make this a technical lecture that everybody's going to just fall asleep listening to. But I do want to mention this molecule because it's an example of one molecule that can have a huge impact over our health, and not just aging, but we do know that, for instance, in a lot of tumors, and for cancer, if we're talking about cancer, a lot of tumors, we can see that NF-kappa B is always on. So it's always being produced and it's always active. And the reason why this is an issue is that NF-kappa B is actually a molecule that's very much a part of inflammatory responses to stimuli that are things like infections and such. And so we think of that as a good thing, which it is, but when it's out of balance and we're always, inflamed, that chronic inflammation, that is strongly tied to things like cancer, chronic inflammation. So acute is different than chronic. Acute is necessary for life. Chronic is where we actually lead to problems because it epigenetically changes other things. We have to remember that we have cells all over our body that have the same exact genes. So our heart cells and our brain cells and our skin cells all have the same genes. There's a reason why they're different, and it's because of a couple of reasons. Well, there's many reasons, but a main reason is because of the environment that they're in. And so because of their neighbors, they get signals from their neighbors, they get signals from their neighbors, and those all tell cells exactly where they should be and what they should be doing. And so when those environments start to shift, just like what we talked about with the microbiome, when the environment shifts, it shifts the ability for that cell to do what it's supposed to do. And so then it starts to change epigenetically what it expresses genetically. So we actually are going to affect our genes of any given cell based on the environment that it's in. And a chronically inflamed environment is going to be very effective in changing the expression of certain genes. And so NF-kappa B is one that we find that when it's out of control, it can be associated with things like cancer, obesity, and what we're talking about today, which is aging. So the real question is, okay, why does it play a role in aging? And part of it is, because it actually blocks other genes that are important in the things that fight aging in actually from being expressed. And one of the main ones is something that we've been talking about quite a bit recently, which is the sirtuin genes. And so the sirtuin genes got a lot of airtime several years back because scientists were looking at resveratrol and other type of antioxidants were actually upregulating these genes. And these genes were efficient in reducing the amount of senescence, which to anybody who doesn't know what senescence is, it's basically when cells only have a limited ability to divide. A skin cell can only last for so long. It can only make daughter cells because they divide everybody knows that they divide. And they can only divide so many times before they crap out because their genetics becomes in danger because the telomere is shortened. And we're getting really technical here, but I'm going to get past that in a second. But so we only have a certain amount of times that can happen before they become what's called senescent, which means basically they're ready to die. They're ready to be, they've gone through all their divisions. They're ready to die. And typically they give out these inflammatory signals that tell the immune system to come and gobble them up, get rid of them, and get rid of, and then that way they won't cause any issues with the rest of the body. Additionally, there are also other type of regulatory pathways where you can cause what's called xenomorphics, where it can delay senescence. So you can actually inhibit a cell from getting senescent and leading to issues. And so that's kind of another way that the body deals with that. But unfortunately, over time, we lose this ability to monitor for these senescent cells, and they start to accumulate. And the more they accumulate, the more inflamed the tissue gets. The more inflamed the tissue gets, the more this NF-kappa B is going to be expressed because it's kind of this feedback loop between inflammatory signals and secrete or upregulation of this NF-kappa B. So it becomes this like horrible cycle. And so that's why scientists are now looking for these molecules that can actually reduce things like NF-kappa B because they're thinking if we can break the cycle, we can then start to see if we can actually reverse the aging process. And they've shown in some animal models that they can do this. And a lot of it centers on these sirtuin genes and genes like these sirtuin genes, because these sirtuin genes, if we look at what they do, is they basically are factors, genes. There's quite a few of them, less than 10, I think. I think there's around 6 of them, and these genes actually can delay the telomere attrition, which is what we talked about. Why there's a limit to how cells can divide, because it delays that shortening of the telomeres every time it divides. It sustains integrity of the genome that way, and then it also promotes DNA damage repair. And so DNA damage repair is where, when Doris was talking about UV damage caused by the sun, one of the things that is the reason why we can actually remodel and heal from that is because those thymine dimers that are created and other genetic issues that happen because of UV damage, our body can fix those. We have genes that's all they do, is they go and they fix these genetic mutations that happen, or these thymine dimers, or these these things that can happen genetically when we're exposed to radiation. But when those genes are turned off and we dampen that ability, we get things like mutations, and we get things like histones that are not regulating properly, so you can't have proper genetic regulation. And so this all is to say that there are some fundamental genetic elements that we do know about, that if we can cause better regulation of those genetic elements through epigenetics, we might be able to not only delay aging, but actually reverse aging. And that's where Doris was talking about actually being younger biologically than you are chronically, because you can actually change that. If you can actually remodel your tissues and your genetics through instigation of these epigenetic type of anti-aging in the real sense, or what do we call it? De-aging versus anti-aging. Because, so if you can actually do that, you can actually reverse your biological age. Now, can you live forever? Probably not. But you could probably live better for longer. And that's where the real question comes in. This is all great, but is there anything we can do right now that would allow us to do what we just talked about, which is, upregulate those sirtuin genes, downregulate things like NF-kappa B. And so, Doris, there are some things that we've talked about, as far as like flavonoids and such. What are your thoughts on what we can do now to actually improve our aging process?
Well, I love that discussion. And this is something that I worked on 30 years ago in a lab at NYU with Mickey Blumenberg and his postdoc, Mariana Tomek-Kanek. We looked at retinoids, the effect of retinoids, antioxidants on skin cells, and specifically the marker that we looked at to see the benefits or detriment was NF-kappa B. So this is something that scientists have been looking at, and we're getting better at it to understand, but it also helped me understand the power of what you put on your skin. If you have the right formula of skincare products, retinoids, antioxidants, peptides, hydration, and you protect that biome. We didn't talk about the biome then, but it turns out that it does affect the skin biome as well. Mm-hmm. So we're building on the foundation of understanding those markers as a measure of how well we're doing, and then looking at the ingredients that will help up or down regulate those markers as a sign of our success in that. So I think taking supplements is really helpful. And so I've added several to my list of things that I take and what I recommend to some patients, not every patient, and then topicals as well. But honestly, diet, exercise, sunscreen are the 3 most important things that will affect 90% of it. And then the other 10% is all these other things. So if you really want to protect, just start as simple as sunscreen every day and being sun smart, which means wearing a hat, sunglasses, physical protection, sun protective clothing, avoiding midday sun, making sure you have enough vitamin D from your diet, not as from the sun. And then you can add in things like metformin that I think is a great thing to add in for the diet. I think it's one of the most inexpensive and helpful supplements that will help you age. Also, there's a fern-based extract called Polypodium leucotomus extract that has been shown to have some benefit, a good amount of benefit against UV and pollution. So it's not going to make you not burn if you go in the sun, but it'll help reduce the damage, and it will optimize your sun protection. So there's a lot of things we can take and a lot of things we can apply to the skin that will help reduce the stressors from pollution and UV rays that are unavoidable after we try all those other measures to reduce our exposure. I don't want anyone to not go out in the sun. I think sunlight and sun is so important for our sense of well-being and our health. But it doesn't mean that you have to damage your skin in the process. So it's not that you should be indoors and be a vampire, like a vampire. It's just be sun smart and make the most of your time outdoors.
Right. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, the sunscreens that we use are not usually 100% effective. So you're going to get a little bit of that wonderful sunlight, and you do need a little bit of the UV in there.
And no one's applying enough.
That's right. That's right.
Enough.
So although they label
right.
it SPF a certain, it's usually not getting that SPF. So at the end of the day, you do want to go outside. And again, it's one of these things where these mechanisms we talked about, which is a little bit is going to be good, right? You not too much, not too little, because you do need a little bit of sunlight for not just for your skin health, but also for your just sanity.
That's what I meant, was for your sanity.
Yeah.
And the time to go out is the beginning of the day and the end of the day.
Right. And then also, there's a myth about, vitamin D production. We know that you can get that through your diet. And really,
it's naturally found in foods. You know, it's not like it's the only place to get it is from the sun. So I wouldn't count on the sun. And also, we don't really have good data on, as you get older or as you have a lot of sun damage, is your skin really making vitamin D from sun exposure?
Mm-hmm.
So we all talk about 10 to 15 minutes of unprotected sun exposure, but for somebody who's very fair, that'll fry them. For somebody who's very dark, it'll do nothing.
Right.
And so I don't think there's an amount that you can have. And then again, as you age, is that as efficient? Are there parts of the bodies where those receptors are better? Until we really know those things, I'm sticking with vitamin D should be as a supplement, or it should be from your food. And there's lots of foods, nuts, fish that have vitamin D, eggs that you can naturally get. Foods are fortified with vitamin D. So don't count on the sun. Anybody who's not a dermatologist, who doesn't see all the melanomas and skin cancers we see in younger and younger patients, it's just to count on vitamin D from the sun. I'm just going to stand up and say, don't do it.
Yeah, I wouldn't count on it, but I do think that even with sunblock, you're going to get some vitamin D production.
Well, that's for sure. Yeah. That's for sure. Okay, I'll let you say that.
Yeah,
right, I'll allow that.
So I would say, you do want to go outside. I actually don't go out enough, but when you put sunblock on, you're going to get some vitamin D production anyway. So
that's true.
It's just being wise about, I know people like you say, Doris, that they think, I got to get my vitamin D, so I'm going to go sunbathe for a half hour. It's not necessary, nor is it healthy. But anyway, moving on, Angela.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll add to the conversation a little bit, just kind of going back to what you said earlier, Thomas, about, our immune system and inflammation. And, for those of you who know me, you know that I'm a breast cancer survivor. And when I spoke to Thomas the first time after diagnosis, one of the things you helped me understand was that all of us carry cancer cells.
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of, is your immune system healthy enough to fight those cells? And inflammation being a big part of why your immune system is not able to fight cancer cells and clear cancer cells. And so, having been through now cancer treatment and looking at working with a well-known integrative oncologist out of Chicago, who has Dr. Keith Block, who's written a book called Life Over Cancer. Mm-hmm. And being in his program now, that's what he does. He optimizes the body to fight cancer cells. So through a series of supplements and extensive blood work, he's able to judge whether he's hitting the markers that he wants to judge. And he's doing so by monthly supplements, daily supplements, but also in quarterly infusions as well. So that whole idea of we can change our immune system and inflammation in our body through taking supplements is near and dear to my heart. And then being part of the medical aesthetic industry and realizing too that outwardly we can be doing things, just as Doris said, through topical ingredients to counteract what we see on the outside. So two subjects, that are very close to my heart is both what we can do both internally and externally.
And Angela, you're so right. We use sunlight in dermatology all the time to reduce inflammation in the skin and treat conditions like eczema and psoriasis, which are sun sensitive, and even some cancers like mycosis fungoides. We sometimes use sunlight, but what we've done is we've been able to filter out wavelengths of UV light down to narrow bands of UV. So UV is a series of energy wavelengths, And it's a spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
and we can narrow it down to just a few elements of that wavelength, a few numbers of that wavelength, where we lower the risk of cancer, but increase the benefits of the anti-inflammatory. And so that's something, because I see patients now who had something called PUVA, which is psoralen, which enhances your sensitivity to light, plus UVA, which is every day, all year round. It's 90% of the rays that reach the earth. And seeing those patients now, they're covered in sun damage and skin cancer. And every time they come in, I'm having to take things off them. Fortunately, that's gone. And now we can narrow it down to safer wavelengths of light. So there may be a safe way to tan with UV light. It's going to age the skin, but it may not increase your risk of skin cancer. So they're not always connected. Also, Angela, does your person talk about wild turkey mushroom extract?
It talks about a lot of different things. It's a very, very specific program, and diet's a big part of it, as we talked about as well.
Should be, yeah.
It's a plant-based diet. It is, free of dairy. So a very, very specific diet. Yes, I know, Thomas. I told
and
you
I think
so.
it works on skin also. I mean, and then also proper screening.
Yeah.
Well,
Thomas
here's
doesn't agree with that?
No, I do. I think dairy is one of the things that everybody gets on my case because I don't like to eat dairy products, and it's not because I can't digest them. Everybody thinks it's because I'm lactose intolerant, which I'm not. It's because I just don't think they're healthy. I think that, diet's very important in reducing inflammation, which is tied in to things like cancer as well as aging. And so, for me, I find I take pride. I call it. I won't say what I call dairy products, but I don't partake. Now, of course, I don't. I try not to be rude if somebody offers me a meal with something in it. I'll just pick around it, or it's not like I'm allergic to it. But anyway, that being said, what you guys were talking about, or gals were talking about just now, as far as cancer, is so tied into aging because the immune system. There's very similar mechanisms that lead to to tumor genesis that lead to aging. And part of that's the immune system has the ability to what's called Treg cells. And so Treg cells can actually tell the immune system to kind of tone it down because it's okay here. And it's part of our the way that our immune system with our microbiome and other things that we come into contact, it's a part of the adaptive immune system. And they're very important because they allow us to function in this world that is not sterile. But the problem is when there are too many of them, they can actually allow things like cancer cells to get away from our defenses. And similarly, that's how aging also starts to accumulate those senescent cells. Because senescent cells, the Tregs, are the ones that kind of say, it's okay, you don't need to get rid of this senescent cell. And I believe that there's also an accumulation of Tregs in the skin as we age, which is one of the reasons that we think that there's also a accumulation of senescent cells. And so there's this kind of similar thread that we were talking about through these disease states as well as with aging. So, while we don't look at aging as a disease state, in a way, it kind of is a disease state. It's a similar thing to almost like cancer in a way, in the sense that our body's now not functioning the way it was intended to function. And that's why we start to lose things like skin elasticity and integrity of our connective tissue. And really, when you think of connective tissue, that holds us all together. So, but that being said, I want to move on to...
Can I ask one question of both you and Doris, Thomas?
Yes.
Is kind of going back to what you said earlier in terms of what causes skin to age. When I look at my situation, my health concern, I think stress played a huge part in it.
Of course. Yeah.
In terms of, I was exercising and I was eating well, but yet I was under a tremendous amount of stress from a number of different areas. And I think that ultimately affected my immune system. So what role does stress play on aging, would you and Doris both say?
Do you want to go first,
Well,
Doris?
stress plays a very big role. And one of the things I talk about in my book called Beyond Beautiful, and I talk about my patients on a daily basis, is that life is full of stress, and stress can be very positive. So we can't avoid stress. I mean, I live in New York City. We live on stress. It's our food here. But it's not about having stress. It's how you manage the stress and how you perceive it. So if you change your perception of it, and as we get older, you have experience. So you go, okay, well, I've been through stuff. I'm here, so I can overcome and I can handle. And then you have that comfort of saying, not only the end of the world is the end of the world, and not everything else has to be the end of the world. So even getting a very horrifying diagnosis as you had, Angela, and I'm so happy you're okay, that feels like the end of the world. But then you look at the data and the statistics and the care that we have and the access we have to healthcare, and we say, okay, well, I'm going to handle this. And you just put measures in place to say, I'm going to deal with what I can, get myself as healthy as possible, do what my doctors tell me, and I will be okay. Life is that's part of the journey. And then finding that there's a good side to it. I had a patient who I ended up diagnosing with melanoma that ended up being metastatic melanoma. And I got him into these clinical trials, and now he's more than 10 years out and cancer-free. He's cured.
Great.
What was otherwise a death sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me that was the best thing that happened to him, because basically he was a schlub. I mean, he was just slogging through every day, no real purpose, and didn't diet, didn't exercise. Once he had this, he's run 3 marathons. He moved out to California, has like this most amazing, rich life that it opened his eyes to that. So I think with everything, there's a flip side and there's an opportunity. And it's when I see people who go through those difficult moments in time, but they don't see it as a stress that's like the end of the world, but as also something they have to get through. And then they see that they now can help other people or have a different purpose in their life that they didn't ask for and didn't deserve, but they make something beautiful of it, as I know that you're doing. So I think that's the thing about stress, is that stress is different things. I see people who break out from stress, people who get ulcers from stress, people whose hair falls out from stress. So they're all different stressors that people handle differently. And there's personality types that will handle different stressors with different parts of their body. It's so interesting to me how real that is. So I try to look at my patients and break it down to where I think their stressors are carrying them, and then help them with tools, as much as with products and treatments and diet and exercise and all those things, but actual tools to look at their stress from a different point of view. And I think that's one thing physicians could do more that doesn't cost anything, but has a very big impact.
Right. And, the way that I deal with stress is I just sweat a whole lot. No.
Does that work for you?
It really does not work for me. But actually, stress inducing stress, again, this comes back to epigenetics, because when we are stressed out, we do release certain chemicals and we upregulate certain genes that does change us epigenetically. Yeah. And so we see certain things like, that's why certain people go prematurely gray, and now, I heard on David Sinclair's podcast, we were talking about hair going gray and then reversing. I'm not sure I've not heard too many people showing that we can reverse graying hair. I know we can prevent it more, but I'm super interested in that because, that's another thing we can talk about another day, because I have some great thoughts on how to reverse graying hair, but it's not by de-stressing. Go ahead, Doris, you had something?
No, one of the easiest things to do to change your stress pattern is to control your breathing. Mm-hmm. Something as simple as a sigh can totally change your stress level. I see people with TMJ all the time, and they're grinding. And stress tends to lead to more stress.
Right.
And we clench, we grind, and I watch them do it in the office. So I teach them to sigh. And I've learned that we actually naturally sigh all the time. It's part of our natural breathing. And if you don't sigh, you actually get very sick and die. So sighing is a natural part of our breathing. We're not breathing at the same rate all the time. Every now and then we sigh. So if you pay attention, you see you're doing it. But if you intentionally sigh more often, when you do that, you cool the brain, you improve your oxygen level, and you end up thinking more clearly, and you just change your whole direction of stress. So sometimes it's as simple as a deep sigh or a slow, deep breath that's controlled, and then having an intention of changing the path that you're on.
Okay, so when I'm passive aggressively sighing at people, I'm just going to tell them it's because I'm trying to de-stress.
No, that's a yawn. A yawn is different. A yawn is a sign of hostility.
Okay.
So that's different than a sigh. You know that in animal models, that when they yawn, they're actually they're like, I don't like you right now.
Oh my goodness, my dog yawns all the time. He hates me.
There you go.
I'm just kidding.
There you go.
So, coming back to the topic here, though, is when we think about these things that lead to aging, we talked about how there's a common thread with cancers and aging and such. Interestingly, again, to that common thread, there's a lot of research right now about senolytics, trying to make drugs that are either novel. Yeah, novel or even existing, whether we can use them to rid the body of senescent cells or actually to make those senescent cells not senescent anymore or to delay senescence. And interestingly, a lot of the ones that are being investigated are either alone or in combination chemotherapeutic in nature. They're cancer drugs. And it makes a lot of sense, right? The real question is, what the correct dosage is and all that, because it's a very different reason you're using it. But also there's a lot of great natural molecules that they're showing have benefits to doing these things. So things like naringenin, which is a flavonoid. And there's actually a list. There's a paper that I can actually put in the notes of this podcast that there's a list of flavonoids and other molecules similar that are found in fruits and vegetables that we can find today as a supplement that actually do things like downregulate or block NF-kappa B in part, and has been shown clinically, this particular one, naringenin, actually is clinically shown to reduce skin age and senescence in senescent cells in skin. And so there are things out there already that we can do to start to lower our biological age in our skin. And we imagine if our skin is lowering, it's probably systemic as well. So it's very important that we, as people in this space in science, as scientists and clinicians, and as an industry, start to look into how we can not just make skin look better, but actually look younger, but actually skin to be younger. And I think in the next probably decade or so, there's going to be a world of difference in how we practice dermatology because of this. And I'm super excited about it. And we're not even halfway through, although we are more than halfway through.
Yeah, but is it bad that I'm thinking that with all these things, I can now go out and eat Cheetos and Doritos and get sun and even smoke and then just take these pills and then just undo all the damage? Like, everybody sort of wants that shortcut. I kind of like the idea because I really like Cheetos and Doritos. I don't really like the sun, but I like those. I like those awful foods. And I would love to be able to eat them and not have the damage.
Right, and maybe someday we'll be able to do that more easily. But as far as damage,
on that day,
as far as damage is concerned, though, we do want to briefly talk about this idea of mimetics, of things that are mimicking adversity or abundance. And so we know of this kind of phenomena where if we do intermittent fasting or something that is going to mimic a stressor, because you talked about stress being a bad thing, but acutely, stress is actually not a bad thing because it allows our body to actually go into a kind of mode where we upregulate certain genes, downregulate certain genes, and it's been shown to be beneficial for the de-aging type of mechanisms. And so there's things like excess heat, excess cold for acute periods of time that I really wanted to briefly mention. So with heat, we know that uses of sauna over time can lower, and it's been shown in studies to lower cardiovascular issues. Now, that being said, in dermatology, we tend to tell people you shouldn't take hot showers because hot showers can actually reduce your skin barrier and lead to like exacerbation of things like eczema. And so, Doris, what's the happy median there?
Well, maybe sauna, which is dry heat, can actually pull more oils and have a benefit. And you want to minimize the long hot showers because there isn't a benefit there. So it's how you get the heat or how you get the cold and how long. And I've seen athletes, unfortunately, who are so good at powering through difficult and painful situations that they don't listen to their body, and they keep powering through, and you can die. I mean, there's an nth degree of this that is going too far, and it's listening to your body. If you don't feel good in that situation, then stop doing it. And you don't necessarily have to go for so long or do so much. So build up to things. Always see your doctor first. And if I see people who are told to wash their hands, and they come in and their hands are washed literally raw. Sure. They've washed off the outer layer of their skin. Their biome is destroyed. And now they're more prone to infection, but they keep washing their hands, and their hands actually physically hurt. So washing your hands is a good thing, but excessive of anything is not a good thing. And so we need to educate people on what those parameters and barriers are.
Right. And
now I have to hop off. I'm so sorry.
No worries. Doris, thanks so much. We didn't get everything done that we want or discussed that we want to, but we're going to stay on a little longer. Yeah, you'll be back, but we're going to finish with a couple of things. And Doris, it was always a pleasure. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
So, we got to most of the first part. We just had way too much fun talking about some of these things. But I did want to bring a couple of things back into kind of consideration before we finish the conversation. Where are we, Alan, as far as time? 6 minutes, okay. So we can go a little bit over. I think that's okay. I'll ask the boss.
We can do whatever
He said
we want,
okay, yeah.
right?
So, all right. So, and then I'd like to get a little more feedback from Dr. Jones over here as well. I do definitely want to get into the microbiome and how that plays into aging. And so Doris and I, we are writing a book on the skin microbiome, and one of the chapters is on the effect of the microbiome in disease states. And one of those that I listed in that chapter was aging. And the more I wrote about it, the more I realized that there's a lot to say on this. But let me just skip down to that right now, which is, what is the relationship with the microbiome and skin age? And so we talked about how there's genetic tests that you can do to look at your biological age versus your chronological age, looking at DNA methylation and such. Same with the microbiome. We talked about that earlier as well, that you can look at the microbiome in the skin, and it's the best indicator of the microbiome on how old you are. That is also, arguably biologically versus chronically, although I believe that study was chronologically. But if we are able to reverse aging on the skin, the biome would not change as drastically. So therefore, it would probably more mirror biological age. We talked about last podcast about skin remodeling and how, when we're younger, we are turning over tissues anyway, but there's less damage to turn over. And as we age, we accumulate damage. And so basically, we talked about the remodeling process. We'll move on from that. Go back and listen to that podcast if you want to hear more about that. But it has to do with all of what we just talked about, which is we do know that the microbiome can, with the C. acnes that we are very much investigating at Crown Laboratories, C. acnes actually can change and modulate, depending on the strain of C. acnes, the way that the immune system acts. It can either be an inflammatory kind of modality or a homeostatic or healthy type of direction, depending on the strain of the microbe that we're talking about. And this, of course, when we tie in everything to inflammation, we basically say this is going to have an impact on age, because if you're chronically inflamed because of the microbes in any given area, that's going to play a part in the aging of the skin, right? And so, regardless of the microbes, also if our skin ages for whatever reason, we're going to have changes to the ecology of the skin, like less oils, barrier changes, thinning of skin. All these things are going to actually play into also the changes in the microbiome. And what we have found is that we can actually see some reversal in these phenotypes. And this is where I'm going to ask Dr. Jones to come in, because he's been looking at a lot of this lately. We've seen some changes in the phenotypes of the skin, cosmetically at least. We're still investigating from a genetic and molecular level. But when we add on certain probiotic strains onto the skin over even as little as a week.
Well, it's actually very surprising that we didn't expect to see this in our clinical studies, but certainly it's come true that, again, a lot of the anti-aging associated benefits as towards lines and wrinkles, pigmentation and the like, barrier, improve actually with these strains.
Mm-hmm. And, it's like you said, we did not anticipate that necessarily, but the more we're finding, the more we're kind of looking in research and doing our own research, we're finding that not just the strains themselves, but also the metabolites that are secreted by these strains are epigenetically, as we talked about before, changing the way that the skin is functioning. And so, we have these endogenous and exogenous, stressors, but also there's things that are good as far as pushing our skin to being a more youthful phenotype. And so the real question is, does it actually do it genetically? So phenotypically, we can see on the outside, but we need to know, is it really masking age or the signs of aging, or is it truly removing the markers of aging that we talked about with like senolytics and such?
So I'd go back to the example that I just shared with, cancer cells. If we optimize our body, our immune system, then our immune system is clearing those cancer cells. And I'm doing that now. I am rated as free of cancer by my oncologist in my team at UT Southwestern and their comprehensive care center. So I am essentially free of cancer, but I also understand now that for some reason my body didn't clear those cancer cells initially. So I'm doing something extra, And that's investing in integrative oncology to optimize my body to fight cancer cells should I be exposed to that situation again. And so, it gets me thinking, Thomas, if we can take, supplements or do infusions or change our diet or reduce our stress. Dean Ornish says the same thing. He has a book called Undo It, where he looks at 4 premises of eat well, love more is one of them, stress less, and move your body. 4 different parameters that he's shown. If we do that optimally, that we can rid ourselves of just about any disease out there.
What was those 4 things?
The 4 things are eat better, stress less, love more.
Okay.
Love is part of it, relationships. And
define love. These are all beagles. Oh, by the way, Alan, I've decided for the next podcast we're going to bring Tyke here, and I'm going to introduce him to the audience.
Oh, very fun.
Tyke, my beagle.
So my question is, Thomas, when I think about what I'm doing internally to help my body to optimize my own immune system, is what we're doing in terms of the microbiome potentially doing the same thing, but outwardly?
100%. And it's not just the microbiome. It's also what we talked about as far as the topicals we put on our skin, the nutrients we ingest for skin health. It's all connected. It's all connected. And so when we talk about, for instance, the challenges in formulating probiotics for the skin, and we've all heard this about how most skincare has preservative systems and such. It does make it a challenge, but it's not impossible. And we know that because in our research, we've done formulations with live probiotics that work very well. It is a challenge, and it's going to take some, shifting in the infrastructure of the skincare industry or dermatology industry. But it's one of those things where if we're truly going to holistically look at what we call the biome, which is not just the microbiome or the skin, but together, the biome, really, for the sake of aging, we have to do everything. Because if we, from the inside out, do everything right, and then we forget about the microbiome and we're slathering all sorts of inflammatory substances on our skin, how is that not going to lessen the benefits? Because it's both ways. It's inside out and it's outside in.
I love that.
So,
yep.
We're kind of out of time for most. We have quite a bit more that I think we're going to have to do a part 2.
Okay.
Part 2 of this topic. Maybe we can get Doris back on. Since she's a friend of the podcast, I think she's contractually obligated. So,
or not contractually, but
well, what is it they say? A verbal contract is binding in the state of New York.
There you go. There you go.
Anyway, so thank you, everybody, from Media World here in Dallas, Texas. This is the Skin Science Podcast, and I'm Dr. Thomas Hitchcock. Thank you for your eyes and ears. We hope you gleaned something from this conversation. If you have any questions, comments, or topics you'd like us to cover, please message me on Insta at dr.t.hitchcock. And if we didn't get to your questions from this week, which I did record, we will get to them next time. So from all of us here at Crown Laboratories, remember that skin science is for life. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye, everyone.